Alright, on that note, good evening, afternoon, or whatever time of the day it is in your part of the world. Happy Gamescom for those who celebrate. I know I am among one of those people. And yes, Silksong is indeed coming out before GTA 6 and Half-Life 3. As well as Dawn of War 4. Even though it's not really making it this time, which is maybe for the better, maybe for the worst. We'll see how that one goes. Also a He-Man game, which is a Golden Axe clone. In this economy, believe it or not. However, so as to not get ourselves distracted from the topic at hand, let me also load up a previous playlist. Hold on a second there. And with that, we should be good to go with tonight's topic, which is, as I've mentioned previously, going to be... Drumroll please, as I am doing that. There we go. The Dictator's Handbook. Chapter 2, this time. Let's see if it'll be able to actually pick up on the presentation being shown. Hang on a second. No, not quite there. You see a book that I'm reading from, partially. So we'll have to go for that one. Ah well. Details, but it should be good enough. Now let's just tone down the music in advance at about this point, and we can begin. Chapter 2, Coming to Power. For centuries, John Doe has served as the placeholder name assigned to unidentified nobodies. And while his first name may have been Samuel, not John, in every other respect Liberia's Sergeant Doe was just such a nobody until April 12, 1980. Born in a remote part of Liberia's interior and virtually illiterate, he, like hundreds of thousands of others in his predicament, moved out of the West African jungle in search of work. He headed to the capital city, Monrovia, where he found that the army held great opportunities even for men like him who had no skills. One of these opportunities presented itself when Doe found himself in President William Tolbert's bedroom on April 12th. As the president slept, he seized the day, bayoneted the president, threw his entrails to the dogs, and declared himself Liberia's new president. Thus did he rise from obscurity to claim the highest office in his land. Together with 16 other non-commissioned officers, Doe had scaled the fence at the executive mansion, hoping to confront the president and find out why they had not been paid. Seeing the opportunity before him, He ended the dominance of Tolbert's True Whig Party, a political regime created by slaves repatriated from America in 1847. And hello there, Charles. You're just on time. Well, a tiny bit late, but still. He immediately rounded up 13 cabinet ministers who were then publicly executed on the beach in front of cheering crowds. Many more deaths would follow. Doe then headed the People's Redemption Council that suspended the Constitution and banned all political activity. Doe had no idea what a president was supposed to do and even less idea of how to govern a country. What he did know was how to seize power and keep it. Remove the previous ruler, find the money, form a small coalition and pay them just enough to keep them loyal. In short order, he proceeded to replace virtually everyone who had been in the government or the army with members of his own small Kran tribe, which made up only about 4% of the population. He increased the pay of army privates from $85 to $250 per month. He purged everyone he did not trust. Following secret trials, he had no fewer than 50 of his original collaborators executed. Doe funded his government, as his predecessors had, with revenues from Firestone, which leased large tracts of land for rubber, from the Liberian Iron Mining Company, which exported iron ore, and by registering more than 2,500 ocean-going ships without requiring safety inspections. Further, he received direct financial backing from the United States government. The United States gave Doe's government $500 million over 10 years. In exchange, the United States received basin rights and made Liberia a center for US intelligence and propaganda. It is believed that Doe and his cronies personally amassed $300 million. As for Doe's policies, they couldn't be called successful. Indeed, he produced virtually no policies at all. He was lazy and spent his days hanging out with the wives of his presidential guards. The economy collapsed, foreign debt soared, and criminal enterprises became virtually the only successful businesses in Liberia. Monrovian banks became money laundering operations. Little wonder that the people of Liberia ended up hating Doe. And yet, provided he knew where the money was and who needed paying off, he managed to survive in power. Damn the idea of good governance and don't elevate the concerns of the people over your own and those of your supporters. That's a good mantra for would-be dictators. In such a way, any John Doe, even a Samuel Doe, can seize power and even keep it. To come to power, a challenger need only do three things. First, he must remove the incumbent. Second, he needs to seize the apparatus of government. Third, he needs to form a coalition of supporters sufficient to sustain him as the new incumbent. Each of these activities actions involves its own unique challenges. The relative ease with which they can be accomplished differs between democracies and autocracies. There are three ways to remove an incumbent leader. The first and easiest is for the leader to die. If that convenience does not offer itself, a challenger can make an offer to the essential members of the incumbent's coalition that is sufficiently attractive that they defect to the challenger's cause. Third, the current political system can be overwhelmed from the outside, whether by military defeat, by a foreign power, or through a revolution and rebellion, in which the masses rise up, depose the current leader, and destroy existing institutions. While rebellion requires skill and coordination, its success ultimately depends heavily upon lack of loyalty to the old regime. Hosni Mubarak's defeat by a mass uprising in Egypt is a case in point. The most critical factor behind Mubarak's defeat in February 2011 was the decision by Egypt's top generals to allow demonstrators to take to the streets without fear of military suppression. And why was that the case? As explained in a talk given on May 5, 2010, based on the logic set out here, cuts in US foreign aid to Egypt combined with serious economic constraints that produced high unemployment meant that Mubarak's coalition was likely to be underpaid and the people were likely to believe the risks and costs of rebellion were smaller than normal. That is, the general rule of thumb for rebellion is that revolutions occur when those who preserve the current system are sufficiently dissatisfied with their rewards that they are willing to look for someone new to take care of them. On the other hand, revolts are defeated through suppression of the people, always an unpleasant task. So coalition members need to receive enough benefits from their leader that they are willing to do horribly distasteful things to ensure that the existing system is manipulated, or rather maintained. If they do not get enough goodies under the current system, then they will not stop the people from rising up against the regime. Once the old leader is gone, it is essential to seize the instruments of power such as the treasury as quickly as possible. This is particularly important in a small coalition systems. Actually, give me a second, I've got a bit more appropriate soundtrack for this particular part. So, once again, once the speed is of the essence, the coalition size in most political systems is much smaller than the majority of this electorate. Furthermore, even though we tend to think that if one leader has enough voters or supporters, then the other potential candidate must be short. This is wrong. There can be simultaneously many different groups trying to organize to overthrow a regime, and each might have sufficient numbers of lukewarm or double-dealing supporters who could aid them in securing power, or just as easily aid someone else, if the price is right. This is why it is absolutely essential to seize the reins of power quickly to make sure that your group gets to control the instrument of the state, and not someone else's. Samuel Doe ruled because his group had the guns. He did not need half the nation to support him. He needed just enough Confederates so that he could control the army and suppress the rest of the population. There were many other coalitions that could have been formed, but Doe grabbed hold of power first and suppressed the rest. This is the essence of coming to power. Consider a room filled with 100 people. Anyone could take complete control if only she had 5 supporters with automatic weapons pointed at the rest. She would remain in power so long as the 5 gunmen continued to back her. But there need be nothing special about her or about the gunmen beyond the fact that they grabbed the guns first. Had someone else secured the guns and given them to 5 supporters of their own, then it would be because someone else telling everyone what to do. Waiting is risky business. There is no prize for coming in second. But anyway, back to our regular programming. Paying supporters, not good governance or representing the general will, is the essence of ruling. Buying loyalty is particularly difficult when a leader first comes to power. When deciding whether to support a new leader, prudent backers must not only think about how much their leader gives them today, they must also ponder what they can expect to receive in the future. The supporting cast in any upstart's transitional coalition must recognize that they might not be kept on for long. After Doe took over Liberian government, he greatly increased army salaries. This made it immediately attractive for his fellow army buddies to back him. But they were mindful that they might not be rewarded forever. Don't forget that 50 of his initial backers ended up executed. Allaying supporters' fears of being abandoned is a key element of coming to power. Of course, supporters are not so naive that they will be convinced by political promises that their position in the coalition is secure. But such political promises are much better than tipping your hand as to your true plans. Once word gets out that supporters are going to be replaced, they will turn on their patron. For instance, Ronald Reagan won the pro-choice vote in the 1980 US presidential election over the pro-life incumbent, Jimmy Carter. When Reagan's true abortion stance became apparent, the pro-choice voters abandoned him in droves. Walter Mondale won the pro-choice vote in the 1984 presidential election despite Reagan's re-election in a landslide. Leaders understand the conditions that can cost them their heads. That is why they do their level best to pay essential cronies enough that these partners really want to stay loyal. This makes it tough for someone new to come to power, but sometimes circumstances conspire to open the door to a new ruler. Most unavoidably, therefore first on the list of risks of being deposed, is the simple, inescapable fact of mortality. Dead leaders cannot deliver rewards to their coalition. Dying leaders face almost as grave of a problem. Let's tone it down a little bit more. Also, that threw me off a little bit. So once again, Most unavoidably, and therefore first on the list of risks of being deposed, is the simple, inescapable fact of mortality. Dead leaders cannot deliver rewards to their coalition. Dying leaders face almost as grave a problem. If essential backers know their leader is dying, then they also know that they need someone new to assure their flow of revenue into their pockets. That's a good reason to keep terminal illnesses secret, since a terminal ailment is bound to provoke an uprising, either within the ranks of the essential coalition or among outsiders who see an opportunity to step in and take control of the palace. Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini in Iran and Corazon Aquino in the Philippines both chose the right time to seize power. Take the case of Ayatollah Khomeini. He was one of the most senior Shia clerics in Iran and a vehement opponent of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's secular regime, and organized protests. His activities resulted in his being repeatedly arrested. In 1964, he went into exile, first to Turkey, then Iraq, and eventually to France, continuing to preach his opposition to the Shah whenever he was. Tapes of his speeches were popular throughout Iran. In 1977, with the death of the Shah's rival, Ali Shariati, Khomeini became the most influential opposition leader. Although he urged others to oppose the Shah, he refused to return to Iran until the Shah was gone. Except for a privileged few, almost everyone in Iran hungered for change. The Shah's regime and those associated with it were widely disliked. Seeing that there was a chance for real change, people threw their support behind the one clearly viable alternative, Khomeini. After the Shah fled the country, an estimated 6 million people turned out to cheer Khomeini's return. Judging from what he did next, they may have cheered too soon. Immediately after his return, Khomeini challenged the interim government, which was headed by the Shah's former prime minister. Much of the army defected and joined Khomeini, and when he ordered a jihad against soldiers remaining loyal to the old regime, resistance collapsed. Then he ordered a referendum to be held in which the people would choose between the old monarchy of the Shah and an Islamic republic. With the endorsement of 98% for the latter, he rewrote the constitution basing it on rule by clerics. After some dubious electoral practices, this constitution was approved, and he became the supreme leader with a council of guardians to veto non-Islamic laws and candidates. The many secular and moderate religious groups who had taken to the streets on his behalf, providing the critical support needed to his rise to power, found they were left out, excluded from running the new regime. Khomeini became leader because he provided a focal point for opposition to the Shah's regime, and because the army did not stop the people from rising up against the monarchy. Once the Shah was gone, Khomeini quickly asserted that it was he, not an interim government or a council representing all interests, who was in charge. Although the masses brought down the old regime in hopes of obtaining a more democratic government, Khomeini ensured that real power was retained by a small group of clerics. The parliament, while popularly elected, could only contain politicians who would support and be supported by the Council of Guardians. There is nothing special or unique about Khomeini's success. That millions wanted the Shah's regime overturned is unsurprising. The Shah ran a brutal, oppressive government under which thousands disappeared. Imprisonment, torture, and death were commonplace. But that was equally true 14 years earlier when Khomeini went into exile and the Shah's government seemed invulnerable. The key to Khomeini's success at the end of the 1970s was that the army refused to stop the unhappy millions from taking to the streets. They had not allowed such protests before. What had changed? The army was no longer willing to fight to preserve the regime because they knew that the Shah was dying. The New York Times published accounts of the farce of a sick leader desperate to hide the progression of his cancer. A dead Shah couldn't guarantee rewards. Neither could his successor. The incumbency advantage unraveled. Faced with the unpleasant task of suppressing the people with only a modest prospect of continuing to enjoy the lavish rewards of coalition membership, the army sat on its hands, smoothing the way for revolution. The story of the rise of democracy in the Philippines is not much different. Benigno Aquino Jr. was an outstanding man. At the age of 18, he was awarded the Philippine Legion of Honor for his journalism during the Korean War. He then negotiated the surrender of a rebel group. He was mayor of Concepcion by age 22, governor of Tarlac province at 29, and a senator by 34. In a dangerous move, he became an outspoken critic of President Ferdinand Marcos. In 1983, Benigno returned from exile in the United States. On the flight back to Manila, he warned journalists that it might all be over in minutes. And it was. He was immediately taken from the plane and assassinated on the tarmac. He should have followed Khomeini's example and bided his time. His wife, Corazon, did not have his political skills or experience, but she had one critical advantage. She was alive. In late 1985, Ferdinand Marcos announced snap elections a year earlier than scheduled. Corazon Aquino stepped in as her late husband's surrogate and ran as the main opposition candidate. There was widespread fraud at the elections on February 7, 1986, so it was of little surprise when just over a week later the Electoral Commission declared Marcos the winner. But Marcos' supporters swiftly deserted him. President Ronald Reagan expressed concern about the electoral result. Cardinal Jaime Sin, leader of the influential Philippines Catholic Church, spoke out. At Corazon Aquino's urging, the people protested. Key members of the army and other leading political figures resigned from the government and joined the demonstrations. Without the army to stop them, hundreds of thousands of people joined the protest, resulting in still more military leaders defecting. In an attempt to avoid bloodshed, Marcos and his family sought sanctuary in the United States. They left the Philippines and settled in Hawaii, but as insiders and many others knew, Marcos would not live long. That, in fact, had been his problem all along. He was dying of lupus, and all his key backers knew it. He could not deliver goodies from beyond the grave, so his supporters sought to ingratiate themselves with someone who might benefit them. Corazon Aquino had no experience in government. Yet she succeeded where her more accomplished husband had failed. Yes, lupus, believe it or not. She challenged Marcos at a time when his supporters knew his time was coming to an end. They were looking for a new partner to defend in exchange for their rewards. Corazon Aquino was inaugurated as president and voted Time magazine's Woman of the Year for 1986. These are not isolated examples. Laurent Kabila, once maligned by Che Guevara as lacking revolutionary seriousness and being too addicted to alcohol and women, took on the mighty Mobutu Sese Seko of Zaire and won. Kabila lacked much in talent, but his timing was excellent. Mobutu was dying of prostate cancer, and everybody knew it. His military simply refused to fight back as Kabila's insurgents captured more and more territory. Mobutu's erstwhile backers knew that their own future would be brighter by abandoning their dying patron, a sentiment captured in the cliché, "The king is dead, long live the king." Health concerns for North Korea's Kim Jong-il and Cuba's Fidel Castro have engendered similarly intense political speculation. Both have attempted to stave off defection by their essential coalition members by nominating heirs. Kim Jong-il promoted his youngest son, Kim Jong-un, to a variety of posts, including the rank of 4-star general, even though his son has no military experience. Fidel Castro likewise promoted his brother Raul to president when Fidel's survival was in doubt following major surgery. By designating heirs who might keep the existing winning coalition largely intact, these leaders sought to prevent the incumbency advantage from disappearing as their ability to deliver on political promises was brought into jeopardy. Impending death often induces political death. The sad truth is that if you want to come to power in an autocracy, you're better off stealing medical records than you are devising fixes for your nation's ills. We didn't mean to say that healthy leaders don't face hazards of their own. If an incumbent runs out of money, he cannot continue to pay his supporters. Why might he run out of money? Because he has taxed so heavily and stolen so much that the masses choose siestas over labor, stymieing the future flow of revenue into the government's treasury. Worse, the masses could choose revolution over siestas, emboldened by the realization that things will only get worse if they do not act now to overthrow their masters. Mismanagement of coalition dynamics and the incentives of revolutionary entrepreneurs can create changes in institutions that topple the incumbent regime and bring new leaders to power. Normally, one of the most difficult tasks a challenger faces is removing the incumbent. But this is instantly achieved when a leader dies or, as in the case of William Tolbert, is murdered. Once an incumbent is dead, there is still the issue of fending off competitors for the dead leader's job. Ambitious challengers still need to grab control of the state apparatus, reward supporters, and eliminate rivals. To resolve this issue, the Ottomans, who ruled what is today's Turkey from 1299 until 1923, eventually instituted the law of fratricide. Once again, this calls for a brief change of soundtrack, so give me a second. And I think we can go with this one. When the Sultan died, the succession depended upon who could capture control of the state and reward his coalition. In practice, this meant grabbing the treasury and paying off the army. Succession became a battle of survival of the fittest to see which son would become the next sultan. Each of the sultan's sons governed a province of his own. When the sultan died, the sons raced back to the capital, Constantinople, in an attempt to seize the treasury and pay the army for its loyalty. The result would often be civil war, as rival brothers each used their provincial forces to achieve sole, total control of the state. The sultan could have already shown favor to one son over others simply by giving him a province to govern that was closer to the capital, thereby favoring that son even from the grave. Ottoman succession could be bloody. Unsuccessful brothers were typically killed. Mehmed II institutionalized this fratricide with the fratricide law, under which all unsuccessful male heirs were strangled with a silk cord. A century later, Mehmed III allegedly killed 19 brothers, 2 sons, and 15 slaves who were pregnant by his own father, thereby eliminating all present and future potential rivals. By the middle of the 17th century, this practice was replaced by the kinder, gentler practice of locking all male relatives in the fourth court of the Topkapi Palace, quite literally the original Golden Cage. With relatives like this, it is perhaps no wonder why Shakespeare's Hamlet or Robert Graves's Claudius chose to feign madness. The general dilemma of succession is hardly unique to the Ottomans. England's King Richard the Lionheart died in 1199. Since Richard had no direct heirs, at least 3 people had a strong claim to the English throne following his death. Richard's father was the previous king, Henry II, meaning that succession could be claimed by Henry II's wife. Eleanor of Aquitaine, then nearing 80 years old, by Henry's eldest surviving son, John, or by Henry's eldest but deceased son Geoffrey's eldest surviving male child, himself but 11 years old, Arthur. I think for this one we can go with... with this one, sure. Eleanor was too pragmatic to put herself at risk for the crown, especially given her advanced years. She understood the likely consequences for her if she pushed her claim. Being the loving mother and grandmother that she surely must have been, she stepped aside, leaving John and Arthur to fight it out. Or more precisely, she looked at who was likely to win and threw her support in that direction, allowing herself to change directions as the winds of fortune switched from time to time. Would-be autocrats must be prepared to kill all comers, even members of the immediate family. The Ottomans formalized this while the English merely relied on the tradition of doing in their rivals. Murder seems to be a favored solution under the extreme conditions of fear and insecurity that accompany monarchic and autocratic successions. What did John do? Even after assuming the crown, he continued to fear Arthur's quest for power, a quest that grew ever more intense as the boy aged into his teenage years. Finally, in 1203, John had Arthur taken prisoner and murdered. Some rumors suggested that he killed his nephew personally. With Arthur out of the way, no one stood as a further threat to John's crown, not until the nobles rose up against him, promulgating Magna Carta 12 years later. Inheritance holds a number of advantages for leaders and their supporters alike. Paying off the right people is the essence of good government, and princes are well equipped to continue to reward supporters. They know where the money is and who to pay off. Even so, why should the court be so keen to go along with inheritance? After all, if the prince takes the top job, then the other courtiers cannot be king, or dictator, or president in his place. Supporting inheritance inevitably means giving up the chance to become king yourself. Yet, there is just one side of the calculation. With so many people who would like to be king, the chance of landing the top job is tiny. In reality, supporters of the late king are often best off to elevate his son and hope that he then dances with the one that brought him to the ball. New leaders need supporters to stay in power, and with inheritance, those supporters are all already in place. The prince knows who they are and how to pay them. Of course, as we saw with Francis Louis XIV, the prince might radically alter the coalition. But supporters of the old king correctly believe in the old adage, like father, like son. It's not a bad gamble for them. Essential supporters have a much greater chance of retaining their privileged position when power passes within a family, from father to son, from king to prince, than when power passes to an outsider. If you're a prince and you want to be king, then you should do nothing to dissuade your father's supporters of their chances of being important to you too. They will curry favor with you. You should let them. You will need them to secure a smooth transition. If you want them gone, and you may not, then banish them some from court later. But for the first time, they need to know your true feelings for them is when you banish them from the court, well after your investiture and not a minute before. Naturally, if you're a young prince who hopes to be king, you'll have to make sure you outlive your supporters first. History has shown that regents are notoriously bad caregivers. Provided a regent is prepared to kill his charge, being entrusted with the care of the would-be future king is a great way to become king. England's King Richard III provides an example. When Edward IV died in 1483, the crown fell to his 12-year-old son, Edward V. Richard III, King Edward IV's brother, was appointed Lord Protector of the Commonwealth and charged with looking after the prince's interests. He was supposed to manage the crown for a few years and then hand it over. Like many leaders, however, Richard didn't relish the idea of giving up power. As the trusted executor of his brother, King Edward IV's wishes, Richard was able to manipulate events to his own benefit. First, he had 12-year-old Edward and his younger brother taken to the Tower of London. Richard then had Parliament declare both princes illegitimate by questioning the legitimacy of their parents' marriage. The princes were never seen again. Richard may not have been much of an executor, but he seems to have had no trouble with execution. It is believed that two skeletons found under a staircase in 1674 belonged to the two young boys. Even in systems that rely on inheritance, the door can nevertheless be opened for a designated successor who is not a blood relative. Leaders often nominate their successor and sometimes choose from outside of their immediate relations. Perhaps because they understand the dire risks to family if they turn to one member and not another. For instance, the first Roman emperor, Augustus, formally adopted his successor, Tiberius. Mob bosses often do the same. Carlo Gambino nominated Big Paul Castellano to succeed him as head of his New York Mafia family. In each case, the designated successor was seen as someone likely to continue the programs and projects of the prior leader. Therefore, there wasn't much rush to replace the old leader. The new designated successors might even enhance the old boss's reputation. For sick and decrepit leaders, nominating a new heir can help them live out the rest of their life in power. Provided the essentials in the coalition believe the heir will retain sufficient continuity in the coalition's makeup, inheritance makes it very difficult for outsiders to offer essential coalition members more than they expect from the father-son succession. Some of the greatest stories and movies of all time portray how the outcome of whole nations, peoples, and faiths come down to the actions of a single individual. Whether it's Luke Skywalker wrestling with father issues, or Frodo disposing of a ring, massed battles have only secondary importance compared to an individual's triumph. It makes for great fiction, certainly, but such events happen in fact, too. For Christianity's first several hundred years, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, was a relatively minor figure even within the Christian community. Bishops were the arbiters of Christian practice and belief, but not until Damasus I, Pope from 366 to 384, was the Bishop of Rome, truly elevated above all other Roman Catholic bishops, becoming the head of the Western Roman Catholic Church. Eventually sainted for his extraordinary accomplishments, Damasus's actions were a case study in the manipulation of essentials, influentials, and interchangeables. By the late 300s, the East had a seemingly insurmountable advantage in the long struggle between the Eastern and Western branches of Christianity. The apostles and of course Jesus himself all came from the East. The holy places were in Jerusalem and Galilee and the nearby cities of today's Israel, Palestine, Jordan, and Syria. With such uncontestable credentials, how could Christianity be seen first and foremost as anything other than an Eastern religion? Damasus had the insight to find an answer. True, the apostles came from the East, but Peter and Paul were martyred in Rome, and it was in Rome that they were buried. Thus, he could argue that Rome was privileged by being the scene of the apostolic missions intended to spread the word, and by the profound example of martyrdom carried out of the East and to Rome. Damasus made the compelling case that only the see of Peter in Rome could be the heart of Christianity because, as Jesus reportedly said, Matthew 16:17-20, "I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell will not overcome it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom to heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." Rome then must have a superior claim compared to the Eastern seas. On the surface, this may seem an explicitly religious argument, but powerful though it is, it obscures the coalition-building strategies that actually made Damasus Pope and made the Roman Church the new locus of power. Nowadays, a new pope is elected by the colleges of cardinals on the death of Pope. In Damasus's day, the method was different. The interchangeables, the selectorate, consisted of all the Christians in the Roman diocese. The influentials included at least the local clergy and other bishops from the province. Defining the winning coalition, the essentials, is where the tale of Damasus's success must begin. Damasus had a rival for election as pope, Ursinus. Ursinus was popular with the lay Christians and with much of the clergy. Damasus, in contrast, enjoyed the support of the aristocracy. Both men had worked closely with the previous pope, Liberius. When Liberius was exiled to Berea by Emperor Constantius II in 354, Damasus, like Ursinus, followed him into exile. Unlike Ursinus, however, Damasus wasted no time returning to Rome, abandoning Liberius, and throwing his support behind the anti-pope Felix II, who was favored by the emperor. I'll have a sip a little bit later. This most assuredly helped cement Damasus's popularity with the controlling classes while alienating the lay Christian community and clergy. With Liberius dead, parallel papal elections were held, resulting in both Damasus and Ursinus claiming election. Ursinus was chosen by the faithful plebeian worshippers and Damasus by the powerful. Riots ensued, leading to a bloody massacre in which 137 people were slaughtered in the Basilica of Sicinius, a popular Roman church. The city's prefects, the secular leaders of Rome, stepped in and restored order by establishing Damasus as the one and only pope. They dealt with the threat Ursinus represented by exiling him to Gaul. So it was that Ursinus's larger coalition of lay worshippers was defeated by the smaller, but much more powerful support coalition behind Damasus. Damasus did not come by his upper crust backing by accident. We have already seen that he had supported Felix II over Liberius. He assiduously pursued support from the upper classes of Romans, many of them pagans, before and during his papacy, thereby ensuring their loyalty to him in return for his loyal pursuit of policies that benefited them. Damasus, for instance, made a habit of cultivating the upper-class women of Rome. His detractors, noting his close association with Rome's leading ladies, accused him of adultery and murder. He was exonerated thanks to direct intervention by the emperor himself. His promoters, in contrast, note that he converted many aristocratic pagan women to Christianity, and they in turn brought their husbands into the fold, thereby expanding the selectorate and perhaps the influentials in Rome's Christian community. That, of course, was good for the growth of the church, but it also was good for Damasus's ability to secure and hold power. He relied on a small coalition, unlike Ursinus, and he worked on growing that coalition from an enlarged set of influentials and interchangeables. Being a sophisticated strategist, he also worked to further expand the set of interchangeables by reaching out to the Christian masses of Rome. This could only help him shore up his political power and his discretionary authority over church funds, discretionary authority he later used to build important public works and to employ Saint Jerome to write the Vulgate, the first accessible Latin translation of the Bible, which further solidified the Pope in Rome's ability to dictate the meaning of the Gospels. Now, how did Damasus expand his appeal to the masses, the interchangeables, many of whom had opposed his papacy? It seems that many of the recently converted lay people of the declining Roman Empire missed their many pagan Roman gods. Damasus recognized that these same people seemed happy to substitute the many Christian martyrs for those gods. Damasus focused his energy on discovering the burial places of martyrs and erecting great marble monuments. Some of his monuments and inscriptions to martyrs can still be seen in Rome to this day. Damasus's efforts bore fruit. He won over and expanded the Christian laity, gained support among the upper classes, and even captured the support of the emperor himself, who endorsed Damasus's view of the preeminence of the See of Rome. On February 28, 380, Emperor Theodosius declared that everyone must abide by the Christian principles as declared by the Apostle Peter to the Romans, and now followed by Bishop Damasus and Peter of Alexandria. Damasus understood what to do to come to power and how to retain it. Indeed, after his ignominious road to election as Pope, he did good works from the perspective of the Roman Catholic Church and achieved sainthood for himself. The door to his coming to power was opened by the errors of Liberius, his predecessor, who alienated the emperor instead of cultivating him as an ally. Damasus did not make that error. He built a small winning coalition drawn from an expanded set of influentials and interchangeables, thereby ensuring loyal, long-lasting support for himself and his papacy. And in the process, his battle for power shifted Christianity away from its Eastern origins and set it on the path to becoming a Western faith. Leaders like Liberius, who failed to do the right thing, provide opportunities for someone new to come to power. But remember, what constitutes doing the right thing must be understood from the perspective of a potential supporter. It may have nothing to do with what is best for a community or nation. Anyone who thinks leaders do what they ought to do, that is, do what is best for the nation or subjects, ought to become an academic rather than enter political life. In politics, coming to power is never about doing the right thing. It is always about doing what is expedient. And now, I'm gonna take a short break, grab myself a drink of water. I will be right back. Enjoy the music. Right then. The king is back, therefore, the rebellion is quashed. Now give me a second to consider what other tracks to put on, or then again we can just go back to the one we had previously. Not a bad idea. Now, where was it? Right here. As it turns out, one thing that is always expedient is remaining solvent. If a ruler has run out of money with which to pay his supporters, it becomes far easier for someone else to make coalition members an attractive offer. Financial crises are an opportune time to strike. The Russian Revolution is often portrayed through the prism of Marxist ideology and class warfare. The reality might be much simpler. Kerensky's revolutionaries were able to storm the Winter Palace in February 1917 because the army did not stop them. And the army did not bother to stop them because the Tsar did not pay them enough. The Tsar could not pay them enough because he foolishly cut the income from one of his major sources of revenue, the vodka tax, at the same time that he fought World War I. Tsar Nicholas confused what might seem like good public policy with bad political decision-making. He had the silly idea that a sober army would prove more effective than an army that was falling over drunk. Nicholas, it seems, thought that a ban on vodka would improve the performance of Russia's troops in World War I. He missed the obvious downsides, however. Vodka was vastly popular with the general populace and most assuredly with the troops. So popular and widely consumed was vodka that its sale provided about a third of the government's revenue. With vodka banned, his revenue diminished sharply. His expenses, in contrast, kept on rising due to the costs of the war. Soon, Nicholas was no longer able to buy loyalty. As a result, his army refused to stop strikers and protesters. Alexander Kerensky formed Russia's short-lived democratic government after toppling the Tsar's regime. But he couldn't hang on to power for long. His mistake was operating a democratic government, which necessitated a large coalition, and implementing an unpopular policy, continuing the Tsar's war, thereby alienated his coalition right from the start. Lenin and the Bolsheviks made no such mistakes. The Tsar fell once there was no one to stop the revolution. Louis XIV suffered much the same fate in the French Revolution, or rather, Louis XVI, excuse me. Successful leaders must learn the lesson of these examples and put raising revenue and paying supporters above all else. Consider Robert Mugabe's success in staying on as Zimbabwe's president. The economy has collapsed in Zimbabwe thanks to Mugabe's terrible policies. Starvation is common and epidemics of cholera regularly sweep the country. Mugabe, quote-unquote, succeeds because he understands that it does not matter what happens to the people provided that he makes sure to pay the army. And despite regular media speculation, so far he has always managed to do so and to keep himself in office well into his 80s. He has reduced the once thriving agricultural exporting nation into one that depends on foreign aid. Mugabe is certainly horrible for what he has done to the people he rules, but he is a master of the rules to rule by. Where policy matters most, when it comes to paying off cronies, he has delivered. That is why no one has deposed him. Now, we all grew up hearing the lesson that silence is golden. As it turns out, violating that basic principle is yet another path by which incumbents can succumb to their political rivals. The incumbent's advantage in offering rewards disappears as soon as coalition members come to suspect their long-run access to personal benefits will end. An incumbent's failure to reassure his coalition that he will continue to take care of them provides competitors with a golden opportunity to seize power. Houari Boumediene was able to seize the Algerian presidency from Ahmed Ben Sella in 1965 after Bella foolishly opened his mouth. Silence would have served him better. Ben Bella achieved fame both on the soccer pitch and as a war hero. He joined the French army in 1936 and, while posted to Marseille, played for their professional soccer team. He was awarded the Croix de Guerre and the Médaille Militaire for his gallantry during World War II. After the war, he joined the struggle to liberate Algeria from France. He became a popular figure in the independence movement and was elected president of Algeria in 1963. But despite his many talents, he made a serious mistake. On June 12, 1966, he announced that there would be a Politburo meeting a week later, and that the purpose of the meeting was to discuss three major issues. 1. Changes in the cabinet. 2. Changes in the army command. 3. The liquidation of the military opposition. He then left Algiers for Oran. This announcement was tantamount to telling his essential supporters that he was getting rid of some of them. Since he did not say who was to go, he created a common interest among the whole group in getting rid of Ahmed Ben Bella. Ben Bella's foolish announcement was just the opening that Houari Boumediene needed. No one was certain who would be replaced, but given Ben Bella's sweeping statement, clearly many would be. In his unforced error, Ben Bella threw away his incumbency advantage and left Boumediene a week to organize a plot of his own. Ben Bella returned to Algiers the day before the scheduled meeting, and he was awakened at gunpoint by his friend, Colonel Tahar Zbiri. Boumediene grabbed his opportunity and the essential supporters defected. Silence, as Ben Bella learned far too late, truly is golden. There is never a point in showing your hand before you have to. There is just a way to ensure giving the game away. There is a common adage that politicians don't change the rules that brought them to power. This is false. They are ever ready and eager to reduce coalition size. What politicians seek to avoid are any institutional changes that increase the number of people to whom they are beholden. Yet as much as they try to avoid them, circumstances do arise when institutions must become more inclusive. This can make autocrats vulnerable because the coalition they have established and the rewards they provide are then no longer sufficient to maintain power. Under the old Soviet system, Boris Yeltsin had no chance of rising to power. His first effort at becoming a major player relied on a proposal every bit as foolish as the decision of Tsar Nicholas to ban vodka sales. He sought to end Communist Party members' access to special stores, privileged access to the best universities, and other benefits not shared by the working people of the Soviet Union. Sure, that was popular with the masses, but the masses didn't have much say in choosing who ran the Soviet Union. Party members did. Mikhail Gorbachev, seeing that Yeltsin was a loose cannon, sent him packing. After the setback, Yeltsin only survived by being resilient and inventive in the face of a changed environment. By late 1980s, the Soviet economy had stagnated. This left the recently promoted Soviet leader, Gorbachev, with a serious dilemma. Unless he could somehow resuscitate the economy, he was liable to run out of money. As we have seen, this situation can get leaders into serious trouble. In order to get the economy moving so that there would continue to be enough money, Gorbachev needed to loosen control over the people, freeing their suppressed entrepreneurial potential. Economic liberalization wasn't a simple matter for the Soviets. It entailed giving Soviet citizens many more personal and political freedoms. On the upside, this allowed the people to communicate, coordinate, and interact, which can be good for economic growth. On the downside, allowing people to communicate, coordinate, and interact facilitates mass political protest. Gorbachev was no fool, and presumably he knew liberalization could get him in trouble. Unfortunately for him, he was between a rock and a hard place. Without a stronger economy, his Soviet Union could not hope to compete with the United States and maintain its superpower status. And more importantly, he could not pay party members the rewards they were used to. But to get a stronger economy, he had to put his political control at risk, both from the masses who wanted a speedier path to prosperity and from within his coalition by those who feared losing their privileges. Gorbachev rolled the dice and ultimately lost. First, Gorbachev faced a coup from within his own coalition. In 1991, harder-line anti-reform party members, fearful of losing their special privileges, a loss openly advocated by Boris Yeltsin, deposed Gorbachev and took control of the government. But then Boris Yeltsin, standing atop of the tank in Red Square, ensured that the Soviet military would not fire on protesters who wanted reform. The mass movement, with Boris Yeltsin at its head, overthrew the coup that wanted to return to the Soviet Union's more repressive policies of the past. The mass movement returned Gorbachev ever so briefly to power, leaving him with much diminished and rump Soviet Union and paving the way for the dissolution of the Soviet Empire just a few months later. Yeltsin, having gotten over his privileges fiasco, understood that he could not forge a winning coalition out of the inner circles of the Communist Party, but he could win over the apparatchiks by promoting greater budgetary autonomy for the Russian Republic within the Soviet structure. they could become richer and more powerful in Russia than they had been in the Soviet Union. In this way, Yeltsin picked off essential members of the Gorbachev's coalition and made himself a winner. Yeltsin was, turned out, much better at working out how to come to power than he was at governing well, but that is a tale for another time.
30 seconds, sir.
Faceless suit ready. Charging up. Electrodes ready. Checking connection. Going to source. Moving out. Yes, comrade. Surging forward. Electrician in the field. 2,000 volts coming up. He's fried. Completing circuits. Let the juice flow. Ground yourselves. Reinforcements.
Alright, that's the joke over with. Most of the examples we have discussed so far have involved autocracies. Although generally much less violent, leader transitions in democracies operate via the same mechanisms. Just as in an autocracy, a democratic challenger needs to ensure the deposition of the incumbent, seize command of the instruments of state, and sufficiently reward a coalition of supporters so that they back him as the new democratic incumbent. Yet achieving these goals is quite different in democracies. In some respects, it is an easier task. In a democracy, it is less difficult, for instance, to detach supporters from the dominant coalition because Democrats need such a large number of supporters. Leaders rely heavily on public goods to reward their backers, but precisely because so many of the rewards are public goods that benefit everyone, those in the coalition are not much better off than those outside of the coalition. Furthermore, since personal rewards are relatively modest once the essential bloc is so large, loyalty is further diluted. The risk of exclusion from the next leader's coalition remains relatively small. After all, the next leader will need a lot of backers too, further weakening the incumbency advantage. Challengers succeed when they offer better rewards than the government. Given that there are so many who need rewarding, this means coming up with better or at least more popular public policies. Unfortunately, because it is easy to erode the support of the incumbent's coalition, it remains difficult for the challenger to pay off her own supporters. When democratic leaders come to power, they need to seize control of government, but there is not the frenzied rush that we observe in autocracies. In the United States, for instance, leaders elected in the November election are not sworn in until the following January. This lag gives incoming presidents time to prepare, nominating their cabinet and appointing people to positions that need to be filled. Originally, the delay, which lasted until March, was required because leaders needed months to travel to the capital from the state that elected them. Contenders to become a new dictator or monarchs never extend the courtesy of waiting for their more distant kin to travel great distances to compete with them. Democrats lack urgency when assuming power because the democratic rules that determine that the incumbent has been defeated simultaneously create a coalition of supporters. Democrats, because they rely on a large coalition, cannot lavish great wealth on their supporters personally. They simply do not have enough money to go around. Instead, Democrats need to find effective public policies that their supporters like and reward their loyalty that way. But this is not to say there are no private goods in democratic politics. There are. And this explains why dynastic rule is common even in democracies. It may be surprising to learn, for instance, that a careful study finds that 31.2% of American female legislators, and 8.4% of men, had a close relative precede them in their political role. Once again, reminder that this is the data from 2012. Nearly 20% of American presidents were close relatives of each other. That's a lot more than chance and fair competition suggest. Dynastic rule is commonplace in democracies for exactly the same reasons that it is popular among autocrats and monarchs. Who better to protect the wealth and prestige of the family than family members? Elected officials get to dole out money and enjoy power and money in return. They are as eager to see their progeny enjoy the same benefits and protect their own legacy as Emperor Augustus or Carlo Gambino. And so it is that the Tafts of Ohio have held high office generation after generation. Ohio's governor from 1999 to 2007, Bob Taft, has an illustrious pedigree. His father and his grandfather were both US senators. His great-grandfather was President of the United States, and his great-great-grandfather was Attorney General and Secretary of War. The Kennedys, the Rockefellers, the Roosevelts, the Bush family, and many other American families also have long and distinguished political histories. Of course, dynastic rule is more common outside of democracy. Even if you don't have the good fortune to be born into a political dynasty, you can come to power in a democracy if you have good, or at least popular, ideas. Good ideas that help the people are rarely in the path to power in a dictatorship. Competition in democracies is cerebral, not physical. Killing foes works for dictators, but it is a pretty surefire path to political oblivion in a democracy. That's a good thing from a moral standpoint, of course. But from a Democrat's point of view, the corollary is that even good public policy does not buy much loyalty. Everyone consumes policy benefits whether they support the incumbent or not. If a leader cleans up the environment or solves global warming, then everyone is a winner, although of course the extent to which individuals value these things will vary. But past deeds don't buy loyalty. When a rival appears with a cheaper way to fix the environment, or the rival finds policy fixes for other problems that people care about more, then the rival can seize power through the ballot box. Autocratic politics is a battle for private rewards. Democratic politics is a battle for good policy ideas. If you reward your cronies at the expense of the broader public, as you would in a dictatorship, then you will be out on your ear so long as you will rely on a massive coalition of essential backers. Winston Churchill is certainly the candidate for Britain's greatest statesman. He is deservedly famous for his wonderful oratory. Yet patriotic rhetoric alone was not enough to defeat Hitler's Nazi Germany in World War II. Churchill did not just deliver rhetoric, he delivered policy results too. He convinced President Franklin D. Roosevelt to implement the Lend-Lease program that enabled a virtually bankrupt Britain to keep fighting. He converted the British economy to an efficient wartime footing and found ways to pressure the Axis powers on multiple fronts. He was fondly admired and praised by the vast majority of Britons at the end of the war. Yet Clement Attlee's Labour Party decisively defeated Churchill's Conservative Party at elections held in July 1945. Technically speaking, World War II, a war that Winston Churchill, as much as any single individual, might be credited with having won, wasn't even over yet. And already the people of Britain were ready to toss Winston out. Churchill famously stated on November 1942, following Britain's victory at El Alamein, "I have not become the King's First Minister in order to preside over the liquidation of the British Empire." British voters ensured he did not have to. Churchill offered the policies of continued austerity to make Britain great again. After 6 hard years of war, rationing, and sacrifice, these policies had little appeal. Attlee chose to promote the National Health Service and the creation of a welfare state over re-establishing international dominance. He won the battle for good ideas. Few would deny Churchill did a magnificent job and he was much loved. But it was Attlee who won. That Democrats need so many supporters makes them vulnerable. If you can find an issue over which the incumbent supporters disagree, then it will soon be your turn to lead. Divide and conquer is a terrific principle for coming to power in a democracy, and one of the greatest practitioners of this strategy was Abraham Lincoln, who propelled himself to the US presidency by splitting the support of the Democratic Party in 1860. During the Illinois Senate race in 1858, Abraham Lincoln forced Stephen Douglas to declare his position on slavery just 1 year after the Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision made clear that Congress did not have the right to ban slavery in federal territories. Douglas was cornered. If he said that slavery could be excluded, he would win the election in Illinois, but he would shake the foundations of his party. If he said that it couldn't, he would lose the election and thereby diminish his chances of being the Democrats' presidential nominee in 1860. Douglas declared that the people could exclude slavery and won the race, of course, but his response on slavery came at the expense of dividing the Democratic Party 2 years later in the 1860 presidential election, clearing the way for Lincoln's coalition to elect him president. Lincoln, more than any other winner of the presidency, foresaw that he would not be popular among a vast segment of voters in the presidential election. He understood that his best chance, maybe even his only chance for election in 1860, lay in dividing and conquering. Had Douglas answered Lincoln's question with a pro-slavery response, that is, in support of the Dred Scott decision as the law of the land, he almost certainly would have lost the Senate race to Lincoln. That might have kept the Democrats united in 1860, but it would have boosted Lincoln's prospects as the Senate incumbent with a popular following. By answering as he did, Douglas guaranteed that his own party would divide over his presidential bid. With competitors Breckinridge and Bell contesting the presidency, Douglas lost his opportunity to win the Southern vote, dooming him and his Democratic rivals to defeat, even though Lincoln's vote total was slim. Lincoln beat the divided Democrats with less than 40% of the popular vote and almost no votes in the South. Similarly, Bill Clinton, with just 43% of the vote, beat the incumbent President George H.W. Bush, who won 38% of the popular vote, in 1992, in no small measure thanks to the run by H. Ross Perot, who got 19% of the vote. Lincoln understood that he needed to keep the coalition as small as possible, even in an inherently large coalition system. Lincoln did not lose sight of this important principle as he sought re-election in 1864. Seeing that his prospects were not great, he maneuvered to expand the set of interchangeables and influentials so that he could forge a winning coalition out of those who previously had no say at all. How did he do this? He introduced absentee ballots so that soldiers could vote, with an especially important impact in New York. It is widely believed that the vote of soldiers carried the state for Lincoln in his 1864 race against General George B. McClellan. Lincoln was a master at using the rules of politics to his advantage, winning while being unpopular with a large swath of the American people. In democracies, politics is an arms race of ideas. Just as the Democrat has to be responsive to the people when governing, when seeking office it helps to propose policies that the voters like, and it pays to want to do more, as opposed to less, even if the economic consequences are damaging down the road, when you're no longer in office. Satisfy the coalition in the short run. When Democratic politicians lament mortgaging our children's future, they're really regretting that it was not them who came up with a popular policy that voters actually want. Sure, voters might feel guilty about the latest $1 trillion program, but see if they actually vote to reject it. With parents like that, what children need enemies? Our account of coming to power began with the story of Liberia's Sergeant Doe. His end provides a useful cautionary tale for those seeking power. Coming to power and staying in power, as the rest of this book makes clear, are very different things. Sergeant Doe knew where Liberia's money was, and so long as he knew where it was and used it to keep the army faithful, he was able to survive numerous attempts to overthrow him. The trouble is that you only have to lose once, and that question, where is the money, ended up being the last thing that Sergeant Doe ever heard. And now for a more appropriate music. With the end of the Cold War, the United States no longer needed Doe's assistance, and in 1989 the US government cut off his future aid. Rivals Charles Taylor and Prince Johnson, backed by the governments of Burkina Faso and Côte d'Ivoire, saw their opportunity and launched an insurgency. Doe sent soldiers to counter them, but rather than act as a professional army ought to, his soldiers proceeded to rape, pillage, and kill, not exactly endearing themselves to the very people whose support might have saved Doe. Civilians flocked to join the revolt. Showing his characteristic lack of statesmanship or judgment, Doe decided to take a car and personally go off in search of recently arrived Nigerian peacekeepers. Following a gun battle that killed all of Doe's entourage, Prince Johnson captured the president and videotaped his subsequent interrogation. The interrogators repeated the same questions over and over again before Johnson turned to cutting off Doe's ear and eating it. Where is the money? What is the bank account number? Doe didn't answer. Maybe knowing he was going to die regardless, he figured at least by keeping silent his family could enjoy the fruits of his labor, living out their lives in a comfortable exile. Doe was incompetent at running a country. He drove an already poor nation into even deeper poverty and civil war, but he knew the essence of coming to power. Although dressed up in many forms, successful challengers follow basic principles. They offer great expected rewards to the essential supporters of the current leader than those essentials currently receive. Unfortunately for the challenger, the incumbent has a significant advantage because the members of the established winning coalition can be confident that their leader will keep on lining their pockets or providing the public policies they want. But if the incumbent is known to be dying, takes too much for himself, chooses the wrong policies, or is seen to have only weak loyalty from his critical backers, then the door swings wide open for a challenger to step in and depose the incumbent. To achieve power means recognizing the moment of opportunity, moving fast, and moving decisively to seize the day. And for good measure, coming to power also means seizing any opponents, figuratively in democracies and physically in dictatorships. Coming to power is not for the faint of heart. Politics, however, does not end with becoming a leader. Even as you take up the reins of power and enjoy its rewards, others are gunning for you. They want the same job that you so desperately sought. Politics is a risky business. As we will see, successful leaders manage these risks by locking in a loyal coalition. Those who fail at this first task open the door for someone else to overthrow them. And with that, I will see you next week as we move on to Chapter 3, Staying in Power. I hope you're learning a lot of exciting things this way. Now, I am guessing just as Kix has predicted, he is still streaming, but let me double check in that regard. Also, we can turn this one off, like so. Thank you, Charles, you flatter me. Besides, who knew that the book that was published about a decade ago by this point is still relevant today? Now, looks like Kix is done for tonight, it would appear. However, Fonto is now back to torturing himself in War Thunder. So, how about we go and raid him? I'm sure he won't be against that, so give me a second to check on that one. Where is that panel? Here it is. So there we go. Once again, thank you all for coming. Hopefully you're enjoying this as much as I do, because I do get the rush of presenting a well put together PowerPoint presentation, believe it or not. Makes me feel almost good about myself. So, we're off to raid Fonto. And on that note, I'll see you all tomorrow. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. In we go.
Cheating is okay now because nobody can actually do anything properly anymore.